All right. Hello, everyone. It's Jason Fierno with the Mining Mavericks. The Mining Mavericks are a curated group of industry leaders who are passionate about making the industry better and more sustainable for everyone. Today, I'm joined by John Gravel of Bedrock Service, and I'm really excited to talk to you today, John. I just found out something very interesting about our past that I'm looking forward to explore. But before we get into that, how are things going for you today?
Things are going well, thanks.
Yeah, good. So just before we hit record, we discovered something about our past that we hadn't determined yet or hadn't quite pinpointed. And to give context, when we spoke last, there was an exchange like, I know you, you know me. We've somehow, how can we be in such a similar space because you're in a similar space as me, commercial procurement contracts. You do more than I do, but we operate in the same space. But we said, well, we never crossed paths, and it turns out we actually have. So I want to talk about that a little bit. You good with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
So John just asked me the questions. He said, Jason, did you work for Free Markets? I said, yeah, holy shit, I did. And for those that don't know, Free Markets was a small startup in Pittsburgh in the early 2000s and has evolved into, what we're going to talk about. But maybe you can give me your recollection of how we first met.
Sure. Well, at the time I was working for Rio Tinto and I was in the procurement group, and the global head of procurement came to myself and another individual and said, hey, I'm interested in this reverse auction capability. Haven't heard about the technology. I've heard about the technology, don't know much more about it. You guys need to get in there and find out more. So the two of us went in and researched some of the different companies offering it, and came up that Free Markets was by far the leader in the space, and wanted to get into reverse auctions. But anyway, we ran the first reverse auction for Rio Tinto, which I now know is many, but Free Markets eventually, well, Rio Tinto was involved with a group called Quadrum, and they started up. Quadrum was a mutual platform for e-commerce, and Rio Tinto was instrumental in that. And then you probably know the story better than I do as far as Free Markets and the change. But we ran, actually, I think it was the first auction. We actually ran it together, you and I.
That's crazy. Yeah, at the time, as John helped me remember, I was very green. I was out of school. This would have been in the early 2000s, anywhere between 2002, 2005. And I was an auction administrator. So I administered reverse auctions, and John was a client of Free Markets. So we had some conversations about what he thought about the tool and our analysis and our assessment. But all in all, it was a light bulb moment for me. For those that don't know, Ariba was then acquired, I think, in 2005, 2006. Oh, sorry, Free Markets was acquired by Ariba, which was eventually acquired by SAP, and now is, in the solutions that people run today. So that's been the evolution over the last 20 years or so. So, well, good. Nice to see you again, John.
Yeah.
I think that's really funny.
Yeah, no, you gave me good advice then on running that auction. It was a successful auction, and despite being green, it was good advice and good insights, and it launched a good run for Rio Tinto in the use of that technology.
Yeah, great technology. I'll tell you, it was a really positive experience for me. Mm-hmm. It also became the catalyst for how I got into mining, and maybe we can chat about how you got into mining too. But the other major mining company that was a client of Free Markets at the time was Phelps Dodge. Mm-hmm. And Phelps Dodge was an early adopter, and they ran a ton of auctions, actually. So when I moved to Colorado, I was speaking with Phelps Dodge, and they said, hey, wait, this Ariba thing. Why don't you come help us implement this, across our different operations? And I thought, yeah, that's cool. I don't know anything about mining, but I know a lot about Free Markets and the reverse auction, so I can do that. And that was just 20 years ago, and I've never looked back. So that's cool. Well, John, in your career, and you've given us some background relative to Rio, you've spent a large portion of your time within the procurement contracting space, but you've definitely since expanded, and your company offers more than just the procurement space. Maybe tell us a bit about the evolution of your skill set, or even of your business, if you want to take it in that way.
Sure. As far as the skill set, it was really more of a curiosity and an interest on my part. As a procurement manager, I was at the Iron Ore Company of Canada at the time when this particular light bulb went off. And I saw projects that were coming and going, and some were effectively managed and some could have been managed differently. And so I saw an opportunity there that I don't think many people saw. That we didn't know. And that really sparked my curiosity. How do I learn more about projects? How do I learn more about cost management, other than just the pure procurement of a project or project services or contractors? But how do we actually get into the nuts and bolts of managing that? So it was really more my curiosity there. And as I looked in the mining sector, I saw this need, because really, if you look more on a macro scale, mining companies don't build new mines every 5 years. If you look at any major city and you see cranes and you see construction workers, they're building new high rises every day. Okay, so there's a lot of experience in these major cities, and relative to high rise construction or infrastructure construction. Whereas in mining, they're not building new mines, every 5-10 years, and they don't have necessarily that requisite experience. Even the operating mines in some instances, and you probably saw this with your time with Phelps Dodge, was the operations will take on a project, and it may be a small project, but they don't really staff it properly. They don't set it up properly. And then everyone scratches their head and wonders why it didn't go well.
So man, it's so simply put, but it's so true.
And that was just my curiosity, and that's what got me into it.
Oh, that's cool. Thanks for that. I realized I failed to properly introduce John. John's currently, well, now I guess as of, he's got a new improved title, but John is currently the CEO and founder of Bedrock Service group of companies. So I wanted to get that out there, show that John's a guy that knows his stuff, which is cool. Curiosity. Okay, that makes sense. What are you curious about right now?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm curious as far as the different disciplines. Well, it's probably more of a need that I'm seeing in the marketplace again from, in fact, we're just on a call earlier today with the software team, talking about construction management firms, companies that focus on construction management out in the field, and they don't necessarily have the requisite tools. And that's a general observation. One of my team actually sits in Mississippi and was lamenting the delays in building the firehouse down the street from him. And how just even that local community and the local construction management firm didn't have the requisite skills and capabilities. So, how do we help that group? How do we help them build a firehouse on time and on budget? And, so we see that, is there a need in the marketplace for that? And I believe there probably is, but, and that's maybe a micro example of a macro issue that we're seeing.
I think it's a macro issue. I can tell you that I've got a friend of mine, Adam Cooper, who runs Ascent out of Atlanta, and one of his primary core business is helping construction companies, be more efficient, optimize their operations, incentivize their project managers and stuff. And he's got a nice business running down there. So there's definitely a need for those that can help, based on my conversations with Adam and what he's up to. But yeah, sure. I like that. Well, so you've obviously got experience on various types of projects and complex projects. What would you say is a biggest challenge that you see, whether it's a fire department, fire station, or a $5 billion process facility in Peru?
One of the biggest challenges I see consistently is really continuity in the project.
Hmm.
And it's from concept to commissioning. And that's really where I describe our services. When you first put together the cost estimate, when you first put together the project to when you're actually commissioning it, no matter what it is, and as I mentioned earlier, in the mining life cycle, we're talking 5 to 10 years sometimes to develop a mine, new mine from start greenfield. And that to maintain a team consistently for that duration is challenging sometimes, because there is such a demand on the project management skills, effective project management skills, that these individuals get poached or they get bored or they move on. In fact, I know of one particular individual that mentioned to me the other day, I don't want to babysit this study. I want to go build something. And so that, from what I'm seeing continually, is the challenge. Because, okay, so that individual, let's assume they do take the decision to leave that project. That's going to be a pretty big hole to fill, because they've been on the project now for 5 years already. And it's going to be another 3 years before it's completed. And those are big shoes to fill. So
Sure.
that continuity, that's continually a challenge.
I think that's right. And let's have a bit of a conversation about that. The first thing that comes to my mind is an old statistic that IPA put out, was that anytime you changed a project manager, project director, it was going to cost you 10% schedule and cost. I think that's probably low, honestly. 10%.
Yes.
Yeah, but even 10% is a lot, especially when you're talking about the size of some of the projects that we get involved with. So that could be really, really significant.
Mhm.
It also makes me think of the way that a lot of the major mining companies have organized themselves, is that they'll have a study group and then a project group. So the study takes it through to, say, 2A, 2B, depending on the company. And then the project picks up from 3 into 4, being feasibility and execution. But there's always this kind of awkward handover between what a study is and what a project is. My perspective is it's smart to separate the project and the study, because, to your comment, nobody wants, like, a project person doesn't want to babysit a study. They want to go build. That's their DNA. But a study person doesn't necessarily want to build either. So there's always, in my experience, this kind of weird transition. I don't know if you've seen similar or.
Yes, I have. And I would even say, one of the interesting parts of the study is looking at optionality and the analysis for optionality of, okay, so how do we optimize this mine? And people get stuck into that mindset of, how do we optimize the mine? You could choose A versus B and plus 1 and 2 and 3, and get X. Or as you said, the other people with the DNA that just want to build stuff, they just get out and build it. So yeah, we do see some of that issue from a continuity perspective, and also the people that are going to analyze and design aren't necessarily the ones to construct, and it's not necessarily in their DNA to push to see things built. And likewise, I see, even on the commissioning side, and that's the other interesting piece, is how many owners include their operations people as early as the design phase, and certainly through the construction phase, to ensure that it's going to operate properly, and that the operations people know what they're getting at their handoff, because that's equally delicate, if you will. So yeah, the phase management is an issue, and certainly consistency and continuity can be challenging.
I agree. No, I agree. And I think when you think about the space that we work in, that we both work in, the it's one thing to get it right as the owner. You know, you've got the owner's team and the continuity associated with that, but then it's also, you know, the contractor space. And there are contractors that are, maybe a better term for them is consultants, that are good at those optionality options, trade-offs, running options, running scenarios, but they're not necessarily great at building. And then there are companies that are good at building that aren't necessarily great at, you know, the early stage study stuff. So there's that challenge with continuity as well.
Hmm. Yes, exactly. Well, and you asked earlier about my curiosity, and I'm only scratching the surface now as far as some of the technology and the tools enabling us to, and I'm sure you've heard the term digital twinning.
Of
It
course.
seems to be the buzzword these days, and I'm still looking for that digital twin, but I'd like to clone myself. But how is that technology going to help us through that optionality and through construction? And can we modify the design stage or get better at the design stage? Because in a lot of cases, at least the way it's been for the last 20 to 30 years, is you design it and hope you get it right. Um, and we have one client that didn't get it right and shut their mind down, and now they're
Ouch.
trying to get it right again. You know, so
Can be very costly mistakes
yes, exactly,
or
big dollars.
missteps. Yeah.
Yes. Hmm.
Well, what do you see that, you know, as the industry evolves, and you referenced it over the last 20 to 30 years, what do you think we've got right? What should we keep doing?
What should we keep doing? Um,
What are we doing well?
oh, that's interesting one. I would say that we're doing innovation, believe it or not, is still coming along pretty well. And we're, as I mentioned, this whole digital twinning concept, it's not just in the mining sector, but the mining sector is adopting it from other areas. So the innovation, I think, is going strong. I think the entrepreneurial spirit is still there.
Hmm.
So I think that is also going well. It's just a matter of being able to work together on it. Um, yeah, it's funny because we always get into conversations of what's not working, and it's easier to talk about and bellyache about what.
Right. Everybody's got recent scars and war wounds, but
Yeah,
you know,
exactly. Um, but I have to say, I mean, just even the last 20 years, I hate to say just even the internet and the technology, but the amount of information being shared is good. I believe it can get much better because really, at the end of the day, if you look at most of the commodities that are coming out of the ground, they are just that, they're commodities,
hmm,
and we're not influencing the price, the sales price, but we're influencing the cost to get it out of the ground safely and um, soundly from an environmental perspective. You look at the ESG aspects of it, but we could do much better in sharing information. But so far we've been using technology pretty well. The
hmm.
fact that even during COVID, the fact that so many mining operations continued the way they did, I think is a testament to our use of technology.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's a good observation. I would agree with you in the sense that while it might not be apparent outside of the mining industry, the mining industry, at least from a technology space, continues to evolve and grow. And there are pioneers and people that push that, but then there are also early adopters that want to, like you said, find a way to reduce cost of operations and increase the overall profitability of their commodities. So I agree with you. I also think we're good storytellers. I was speaking with a friend, Andy Reynolds, who came out of the Royal Navy into mining. I was like, well, what? I mean, that's not even the same thing. Like, what? How did that happen? And he said, well, what he realized was that in the Royal Navy, they were really good at telling stories, and he liked that. And then when he came into the mining industry, it was the same thing. And I think that's really true. If I reflect on my experience within mining, it is so common for us to sit around a table virtually now, but just to kind of hem and haw about the projects and the war stories and exchange, the different experiences that people have had. And I think that that builds a strong community, and I really appreciate that about the industry.
Mhm. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, I hadn't thought of the term community because you think of it in virtual terms, but at the same time, there are certain groups, being in Vancouver and quite a few miners in Vancouver, different communities get together, different tribes, if you will,
sure.
to talk about different things. In fact, was invited to one very small group that meets once a month. And in fact, the invitation just went out this morning, and they're calling themselves the Erudite Illuminati. But yeah, same thing. And it's you gather for a meal last Thursday of the month and talk about mining.
Okay. Yeah, I participate in similar community. It's virtual, although some folks are in Vancouver, but
Mhm.
do the same thing, come together every 6 weeks at this point. But I've also thought about creating a collaboration community within mining, because I think as you network, as you interact, as you engage with people, I think it really strengthens what we can do, because we're stronger together than we are united. So I think there's
Mhm.
something to be said about the strength in numbers, the strength in community.
Oh, absolutely. And I would even go so far as to point out the two different associations that we're closest to, at least, the CIM in Canada and the SME in the United States. Both of those groups are good at sharing information and trying to share across platforms. It's obviously a lot of different participants in those groups and a lot of different geographies. So, but yeah, you're right. There is a lot of opportunity in sharing what we learn.
Yeah, definitely. I think those two groups, I'm funny, a Yank, but I'm more closely affiliated with the Canadian Institute of Mining than I am SME.
Hmm.
And just to give a plug to them, they've got their Global Capital Project Symposium in Toronto in November. And
Hmm.
I'm particularly excited about that because, one, I get the opportunity to present, but two, we're in person and we get to
Hmm.
see each other. So rather than the virtual discussion, you'll be able to reach out and touch somebody, so to say. So I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to that. And I appreciate about them, CIM in particular, that they focus on the capital project space, which is what's near and dear to my heart. So I really am thankful for them for doing that and
Hmm.
sharing in that way.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I've found SME is a bit more operational focused than it is
Mm.
project focused.
Hmm.
And I've often wondered why that is, but anyway,
Well, if
interesting.
anybody knows, tell us, because we're curious. I'm curious too.
Yeah.
I say this a lot. If you look at the balance sheet or you look at the financial statement of a mining company, 50% OPEX, 50% CAPEX for most of
Hmm.
them. It's like,
Hmm.
well, why do we focus so much on OPEX when we're still spending, huge sums of money from a CAPEX standpoint? But yeah, we don't talk about the CAPEX. It doesn't make logical sense to me, but maybe
Hmm.
somebody has an explanation that I could understand, my simple mind. Well, we speak about mining, but your company, Bedrock Service or Bedrock Group of companies, spans other industries as well. What do you see perhaps out of other industries that mining could adopt or mining projects could adopt to help us evolve?
Um, I would say it's much of what you and I had just talked about, and then it's information sharing. But what are those models? I look at, and let's just nail down big industries as an example. What
Sure.
can we learn from the healthcare industry? I mean, holy cow, we just got through, a major pandemic. We're not finally through it yet, but we're seeing the light at
Sure.
the end of the tunnel. And we were able globally, collectively, to develop a vaccine pretty quickly and get it administered. And that obviously took a lot of government intervention and a lot of people involved. And yes, I mean, in the balance, it's much more significant than anything we're talking about today. But
Hmm.
what can we learn from that type of information sharing and an aggressive acceleration of a shared agenda? I would even say the aviation industry is another example. I mean, you have a group like the Federal Aviation Administration, and granted that's a U.S. based entity, but for the most part, the world largely looks to the FAA to say, okay, what are the standards and how do we learn? How do we share that information? So from other industries, yeah, I think there's opportunity. And I even look at from a project management perspective, and you're going to laugh at this one, but I even look at the movie industry. What do we
Okay.
learn? A movie is a project.
Sure.
And
I get that.
there's we use the term actors, and there really are actors in the major mining projects. And how do you make sure that you get Steven Spielberg managing your next mine? How do you make sure that you get the right person that has that requisite experience? How do you get the right actor, the right that chemistry, whatever that is? And so I almost look at that sometimes as a bit of a microcosm of, we see the same thing in the mining sector because you are pulling different people with different experience and different background into a similar type of environment because they're going to produce something really spectacular at the end of the day. So,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say it's a matter of finding the right people that have the right skill set. So, how do we adopt that? How do we pick that up? How do we look at those other industries and pick those things out? That's always my curiosity.
Yeah, I'm curious too, frankly, but I've never heard the analogy of movies, but I like it, and I think I want to explore that a little bit more because you're right. If you have Steven Spielberg, that's totally different than what was that guy? Stanley Kubrick.
Yes.
Their
Or Martin
minds
Scorsese. Yeah.
or Scorsese, yeah, they work in a completely Tarantino. They work in a totally different manner, and they
Mm-hmm.
produce a different result. But ultimately, they have the same objective, which is to entertain and
Correct.
to build a business on that.
Mm-hmm.
I find myself going to sports analogies, and I don't know if that's because I'm an athlete or what, but I really like the movie actor actress analogy, and it rings true. It really hits close to home. I think the most significant thread to pull out of that, though, John, in my mind, is that it comes down to people. And if
Mm-hmm.
you have one director versus the other, I mean, those are people. And then how do you build that cast around them that has the same vision as them and the same idea for what this movie is that they're going to produce? Like, how do you do that? But it all comes down to people.
Yes. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. It is people. And it is people with the requisite experience.
Totally.
And so, I often try to find the projects that were delivered on time and on budget, and who are those people, and how did they deliver that? And not just in the mining space. I even look at. I had the pleasure of meeting the woman that was in charge of the Vancouver line, or they call it the Canada line here. Excuse me. That goes from downtown to the airport,
Mm.
and that was
Mm.
built for the Olympics. And just a really interesting individual. And I would like to go back and just sit down and interview her for a book, if you will, just to
Mm.
say, okay, what makes you tick? But yeah, just yeah, how does someone like that? Because you look at that, it's the Canada line was built on time and on budget for the Olympics, and it was a pretty incredible feat. You know.
And I'm thankful for it. When I worked for Goldcorp, and Goldcorp had its global headquarters in Vancouver, I was back and forth between Denver and Vancouver, I don't know, 20 times a year or something like that. But it was easy to fly into YVR and then take the line straight in. It was a great, great route, way faster than taking a taxi. I mean, and it was very affordable. So
Yes.
yeah, it's a good end result. I think probably something worth looking back on. If you ever interview her, let me know. I'd be interested to see and listen to it for sure.
Sure.
That's cool. When I was thinking about our conversation, I thought something that might be fun would be a bit of an experiment, but also something I think would be interesting for our listeners. And that is, given your background and my background, I thought it would be fun if we had a conversation which was, what goes into developing a contract strategy or a procurement strategy? What are the things that you, as a consummate procurement professional, expanded to project management and beyond, but what are the things that come to your mind right away when you think about how to do that? So I thought maybe we could play with this a little bit and see
Sure.
how we both attack it, but also be insightful for people that are sitting in front of their desk saying, "Oh shit, I got this contract I got to put in place, and I don't really know where to start." So I thought we could give them a hand and really extract your experience and mine.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Okay. I guess where would I start? I think I heard you ask. I would start by asking the question of what the end result needs to look like. What does success look like? And sometimes when we get involved in what we would call a gap analysis, or we get involved in a project that hasn't gone as well as it should, we'll often start with that question and say, what does good look like? What does success look like to you? And then try to work backwards from there. And from a contract management standpoint, from a commercial perspective, how is the contract going to be administered? But it also comes down to the sophistication of the contractors themselves, and their capabilities. And is it a local market that is flush with contractors and it's a very competitive market? Or is it an environment where you're going to have to be flying in a specialist contractor? And even if that is the case, you're flying in that specialist contractor, they're really putting forward the right people. Again, it comes back to the question we were talking about before. It's the people, it's the boots on the ground, and what they're going to be able to achieve. So from a starting point, I always look at the end in mind first, and then try to work my way backwards. How about yourself? How do you approach it?
Yeah, no, that resonates with me as well. Thanks for asking. I try to do that with everything in my life. Like what is the end result that I want, and then back into it. So when a owner brings my team in and says, we've got this project, the first question out of my mouth is always, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the reason for that is, what's the result that you want, and how do you want to behave? Do you want an adversarial relationship where you pound on people? Do you want to incentivize behavior? Do you want, heavy on the administration, dealing with claims later? Like, what do you actually want the outcome and the result to look like? So the question is, what do you want to be when you grow up? People look at me a little strange sometimes, but to your point, you really have to start with the end in mind. So I look at it the same way as you in that sense.
Yeah. No, it's interesting that we take the same approach, and unfortunately, I don't know that everyone else does, or they get locked into the conversation. It's easy to get locked into the conversation of one strategy versus the other.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And that's, and unfortunately, sometimes that's predisposed by executive board or executive direction or perceptions from what someone heard, and the project director's been given as marching orders, and this is the kind of contract you'll have.
Right.
And that's always an interesting one as well. Oftentimes doesn't go very well in the end. But yeah, it's interesting to always start off with that question. If you have that flexibility to then, right size the strategy, then yeah, you have a greater chance of success.
Yeah. So such a good point that you're making there, that sometimes if you walk into a scenario like that and they've already predetermined what they want to do, yet there's not necessarily anyone with a commercial background or that has the experience. So how do you navigate those waters to pull on the thread a little bit harder? So you, same as you, and I'm going to kind of follow your train of thought here. Start with the end in mind, but then you went to what's the contractor base? What's the geography? You know, where is this project? Is it fly in? Is it fly out? Is it camp? Is it in the Arctic? Is it at elevation? You know, there's 1,000 variables. Maybe 1,000 is an exaggeration, but there are a multitude of different variables that have to come together to a collective, cohesive strategy. And as far as I'm concerned, I think that's an artwork. I think that's a form of art to end up at the right place. So my advice for anyone was hire a professional, but also, you know, just take a step back and look at the big picture and determine what you want to be when you grow up and what you want the result to be.
Yes, exactly. And I think in the boardroom, there's certain perceptions and expectations. And, you know, I often call it, you probably heard about the firehouse syndrome, where they've done studies and you put firemen together and don't expose them to any outside influences, and you tell them a story and see how that story changes over the 2 weeks that they're on duty. And they don't have any outside influence. It's really amazing. So I call it the firehouse syndrome in the executive suite sometimes, because they tell themselves these stories, and the stories just get more outlandish, if you will, as time goes on, or more detached from really the project and what's happening. We recently had a client. I'll throw out an example of that. Where their expectation of the labor rates in the marketplace is, and they had looked at all of the statistics, the cost statistics around the nation, and said, well, this is a good place for a low cost project, and this is where we're going to build it, etc. Only to find out that the labor rates were low because there wasn't that much skilled labor that they needed for their project. So it's like, well, you know, come on, guys.
I hate to laugh, but yeah.
And then they're having problems hiring people to their project with the right skill sets. And it's like, well, geez, you know, you told yourself this story that labor was low, but you didn't look at what labor was there and what, you know, and it turns out it's largely craft labor and not very well skilled and not the individuals that they needed on their project.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, sure.
So huge sticker shock when the real prices started coming in.
It makes me think of recent history or circumstances that I found myself in, particularly around underground, is you'll have folks that have come from, whether it's Australia or Canada, even South Africa, but real heavy centric underground mining areas that have robust and mature infrastructure to support underground development. And they take the numbers that they were getting in Canada at a place that had been running for 50 years and want to take that to a developing country, you know, where they've never mined underground before. And it's like, well, I want to get those meters we did in Canada. Yeah, you're not going to get that. Like, it's just not going to happen. But there's this mentality that if we did it there, we can do it here. And you can, but not on day one. I mean, realistically. So I feel you, man. I really do.
Yeah. So I would go back to the original question as far as setting strategy. And I think part of it is just to help manage the expectations is really the point that I was trying to make, that
Sure.
really understanding what you're getting into and what to be very realistic about the outcomes and not just tell management what they want to hear.
Yeah. Amen to that. I 100% support that wholeheartedly. So thank you for closing that loop and saying that. Well, John, I really appreciate the conversation and which comes me to the question that we ask everybody that, you know, comes on our show, which is what do you, it's a two-part question, which is where do you see the industry going in the next 10 years? And
Mhm.
then where do you want to see it? And you
Hmm.
can pick which one you want to go first with, but it's where do you want the industry to be in 10 years? And then where do you think it will be?
Hmm. Okay. Where I want it to be is more efficient and effective. Uh, and where I think it'll be, I think it's going to take more than 10 years
Fair enough.
to be where I think it could be in 10 years. But yeah, no, I think, I go back to the concept of technology. Technology is not the savior. I want to be very clear on that. And,
Definitely.
I learned that early in my career in mining that, we need to look at, there's reasons we've done things this way for so many years because it actually works. I mean, I look at, you may know or read the books by Nassim Taleb. One book he wrote, Anti-Fragile, and he references a fork. I mean, we've
Mm.
used forks for years because we know they work.
Hmm.
And, why change that? You're not going to develop a better fork. I'm sorry. Yes, I enjoy using chopsticks. But at
Sure.
the same time, a fork is just, you can't beat it. And that's same true for mining. So technology is not going to save everything, but are there ways that we can use technology to improve how we build mines, how we extract materials, and be better stewards of the environment? I think the answer is yes. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just a matter of, again, coming back to working together on the problem and not working in isolation and in vacuums, if you will. So hopefully that answers the question of 10 years.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting about the fork. I'm not familiar with that author, so I'll check that out. What I believe is true too is it's working together like this idea that we're going to figure this out working in silos is insane. So I think the way to move forward is by breaking down relationship barriers and being more collaborative as an industry as a whole. And how do we use this finite resource pool that we have to build all of these projects that we have? We've got to be smarter about that.
Mhm.
For
Absolutely.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So appreciate you saying that. Well, John, really appreciate it. What's the best way for folks to get in touch with you if they want to learn more?
Email is probably a good way. I'm also on LinkedIn as well. You can find my profile there. And so, yeah, maybe initial introductions through LinkedIn, but also through email. And it's john.gravel@bedrock-service.com. So it's a long email address. That's why I say LinkedIn may be better. And the last name is spelled like gravel. It's pronounced Gravel, but yeah, it's anyway, that's a mining last name, I guess.
Job hazard, huh?
Yeah,
That's funny.
exactly.
All right. Thanks, John.
Great. Thank you.